The Television Critics Association announced their nominations this year later than ever in their 36-year history for the first time in July since 1989. They announced in May in 2014 when they were going head-to-head with the Critics' Choice Awards, but otherwise they are normally announcing in June. Now, voting closed this year on June 26th, then they waited a couple weeks to drop their nominations at 1:30 p.m. Pacific on a Thursday with no lead-up. So this was more than halfway through the Emmy voting period, which was a choice, but to each their own, I guess. So I do not really see them influencing Emmy voting at all, but I think that we can use them in our Emmy predictions to gauge kind of which way the wind is blowing. So I'm Riley Chow of Gold Derby, here with Tony Ruiz and Luca Giliberti. And Luca, Unbelievable and Watchmen co-lead the nominations with 4 each. So what do you make of that outcome, and is it influencing your Emmy predictions?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily influencing my Emmy predictions because I've always thought both Watchmen and Unbelievable would be strong forces at the Emmys. Watchmen's nominations don't surprise me at all. Not only is it extremely relevant, but it's just one of the most critically acclaimed shows of the year. I guess we can talk about a new program nomination at one point in this slugfest because that's something that's very interesting, but the other nominations didn't surprise me.
What makes it so interesting?
Because it's being submitted as a limited series at the Emmys, and usually these, I'm not sure, I don't think a limited series qualify for new program. We know it contended as a drama series at the Winter Awards because they weren't sure if they really were doing a second season yet, and they still aren't quite sure. There's still the possibility. That's what surprised me about it. I don't know if they have specific requirements that allowed it to be submitted there, but or contend there. But that nomination was definitely interesting. And as for Unbelievable, I think that did surprise me a bit. I expected it to get into Program of the Year, into Limited Series, and maybe Merritt Wever, but it got in Merritt Wever and Caitlin Dever. They're the only show to have gotten in 2 performers this year, which I find very impressive. I've had Caitlin Dever in my limited series actress lineup the entire time. I haven't taken her out, so this won't encourage me to do anything really because I have always thought that she would be in this race, even though many people don't, which is understandable.
And Tony, what do you make of Watchmen and Unbelievable leading the nominations?
I was actually, I was not surprised that they were leading. What surprised me was that Mrs. America didn't get any kind of like individual like a performance nomination because really that whole series has been kind of, even though it is very much an ensemble, it does have Cate Blanchett at the middle of it. And
do you mean other than Cate Blanchett?
Other than Cate Blanchett, I meant to say, yeah. I thought maybe it might get at least one of the other. Especially since the individual achievement in drama seems to be dominated by limited series. I thought maybe it might get more than that. So I kind of have to wonder if maybe Unbelievable is especially since it aired so long ago, since it debuted so long ago. I wonder if maybe that has more. This could kind of jumpstart its momentum and remind people of it.
Yeah, it's interesting when they decide to double nominate or not double nominate. I mean, obviously they do sometimes, like with Unbelievable this year. A couple of years ago, we even had 2 pairs going head to head with the first season of Killing Eve and the final season of The Americans. So I'm intrigued by how they didn't nominate Bob Odenkirk alongside Rhea Seehorn or Dan Levy alongside Catherine O'Hara.
The Rhea Seehorn nomination is something that I don't think I wouldn't. It is there. It's a big nomination, but considering the critics have always been banging that drum for years now, it doesn't surprise me that she got in finally at one point. But considering Bob Odenkirk has been up here so many times, it is surprising that they weren't able to get both in, especially since Better Call Saul has been such a favorite here. And as for Dan Levy, I think a lot of people actually thought he had a good chance of getting in here. And Schitt's Creek managed to get into Program of the Year as the only comedy in that lineup. So you would think that Dan Levy would be able to get in, which is why I think Caitlin Dever's inclusion is so important, or it means so much because she beat out so many people which is just surprising for a show that, as Tony mentioned, aired last September. And so I think that's why her inclusion is so vital, I guess.
Yeah, Rhea Seehorn is the first supporting nominee in 7 years. The TCA, they used to do a pretty good job of nominating supporting performances. They don't distinguish between lead and supporting like the SAG Awards for TV. We would, regularly see them nominate people like Jane Lynch over Matthew Morrison or Nick Offerman over Amy Poehler, but that hasn't really happened lately. So that's quite a boost of confidence in people's predictions for Rhea Seehorn. I actually didn't add her to my predictions because, yeah, the critics, they have always championed Better Call Saul. And it also made it easier for me to continue to not predict Bob Odenkirk.
For Rhea Seehorn, that first hurdle is that nomination, because she's never been nominated at the Emmys. Even though last year, for example, many of her co-stars did, and there really was a path for her. But the buzz for her this year is on a completely different level. There's never been this much buzz, and if she is going to get in, it has to be this year with 8 slots, with this buzz, with this TCA nomination, even though we said this last year as well, when so much of the competition was gone. It'll be very interesting. I don't have her in. I don't know if I will put her in, because I've been proven wrong way too many times, as have many of us. But again, if she has all this passion, maybe it's just a bit more than it has been the past few years, and that might just tip her over the edge.
The one that really kind of I thought was strange was Mark Ruffalo's inclusion, and the show's exclusion. I thought that was pretty interesting. Of the HBO is kind of known for its limited series. I mean, we've seen it kind of run the gamut with Chernobyl, but I was actually surprised that The Plot Against America beat out I Know This Much Is True in limited series. So it'll be really, really interesting, I think, to see where the Emmys go from here, because I don't think either. I think The Plot Against America might be the underdog, but this might give it a boost, because it doesn't have, it doesn't necessarily have some of the same kind of name recognition among the cast or even the source material as I Know This Much Is True does.
Right. I was starting to lose faith in Mark Ruffalo, because that show just didn't generate a lot of buzz when it aired. But this inclusion has me very confident in him getting in at the Emmys. And we should probably mention that I believe, at least in the last decade, not a single person from a limited series who was able to get in at TCA was snubbed at the Emmys. So I think that's something very important here. And what you mentioned about The Plot Against America, I think that's also an inclusion we should be looking at, because, as you said, it edged out a few other shows, including I Know This Much Is True. But the fact that Mark Ruffalo got in without his show, I think bodes very, very well for his Emmy chances. I think we were all very confident in him early on in the season, and we started losing some of that confidence when the show actually aired. But I think he is now comfortably in.
Yeah, I think the limited field might be where I'm really thinking more about my predictions after these TCA nominations. One that stands out to me is the snub of all TV movies. That's not something that we normally see. They snubbed not only Bad Education, but also El Camino, even though these people worship Better Call Saul and the Breaking Bad franchise. Bad Education is a show that I thought was really talked a lot about by the critics on Twitter when it came out. There seemed to be a lot of buzz that I was not expecting, and I don't know if that has all just dried up by this point. So the limited lead actor field is a category where I feel like there are more contenders that make sense for a nomination than there are actually slots. So I'm wondering if now Hugh Jackman is in danger, and maybe I should drop Allison Janney too.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I've always been a bit wary about Hugh Jackman. I know that performance was very acclaimed. The movie was very acclaimed, but I mentioned this the first time we talked about limited series a few months ago, is that TV movies just don't fare well in the acting categories at the Emmys anymore. We'll get our occasional Laura Dern for The Tale, But all in all, the limited series have a much better chance at getting acting nominations than TV movies do. I actually removed Hugh Jackman now because I feel like Chris Evans, for example, is someone who's been rising in that category. And Allison Janney I have never had in because that category is stacked with people from limited series.
Yeah, they also snubbed Paul Mescal for Normal People, even though they did nominate the show in their miniseries category, and they shut out Unorthodox. Paul Mescal, I'm more surprised about missing, but ultimately I'm not too concerned about either of these shows not doing well since they were more word of mouth hits. They didn't get as many critics reviewing them in the first place. So I feel like there's a discrepancy between what the critics watched in this case and what normal people watched, even though these were both acclaimed shows.
Isn't that the case? Isn't that usually the case? I mean, one of the things about critics about TCA is that there's always at least there's always a bridge. I think the Emmys have certainly in the last 5 or 6 years become far more populist in terms of their nominations and even a lot of their winners, especially since they've taken kind of the tape requirement away, the way the voting has changed. So the impact, I think, of some of these nods is, I think, just a momentum booster. I mean, there's, I think, 3 days left until voting closes. So these nominations kind of coming out, all it can do is help certain people, I think. Like for example, you have something like the morning show, which only gets in for new program, but you don't get like a Jennifer Aniston nomination. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of interesting to see what gets in where, and the ones that you really have to look at is you have to see the overlap between like things that have both a program nomination and an individual nomination. So
and I think it also gives us, for people who are predicting the Emmys, it sort of tells us in which direction the wind is blowing, because as we've talked about, the fact that someone like Mark Ruffalo could get in while others couldn't, or while his show couldn't, for example, tells us that there might be more support for him than we had initially thought. So I think that's what these TCA awards, this year at least, since they came out so late, the nominations, I think that could help us sort of see where the passion is. And since you had mentioned the morning show, I actually think the morning show wasn't a show that was necessarily going to do well with this group because it wasn't necessarily critically acclaimed. That new program nomination actually surprises me. I didn't think it was going to get in anywhere. But the fact that Jennifer Aniston didn't get in is interesting because neither did Laura Linney and Olivia Colman, and we all presume that those three are our Best Actress frontrunners at the Emmys. So that's also very interesting.
Yeah, going off of what Tony said about it's interesting where shows get in some places and not others. The one that really confuses me is Euphoria in Best Drama Series because it's not up for new program. And that's something that we see regularly at TCA. Like last year we saw with Homecoming, where it got the drama nomination, but it didn't get into new program. Or previously, I think it was Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt got into comedy, but not new program. But then what you do is you just kind of count up, like, okay, like Homecoming was snubbed for a bunch of comedies in new program. So it actually does line up, which is actually not the case with Euphoria, where it got into drama over The Mandalorian and The Morning Show, and then the opposite happened in new program. So I don't know what's going on over there.
That's very difficult to explain. It's just very strange. But the fact that Euphoria keeps sneaking in, it snuck in at BAFTA and now it's snuck in here. I think that's more support for the show than than I initially thought we would see. I don't think it doesn't have much of a chance at getting a drama series nomination at the Emmys, but the support for it has been very surprising because if you think about the subject matter, it's not something that critics usually gravitate toward at all. I think the fact that it is such a unique show and that it tackles its topic so uniquely is something that it's helped it so far. So that's another interesting inclusion here.
So Ozark and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel are possibly our two Emmy winners for the series categories, or at the very least, are runners-up. Now, neither of them were nominated in any categories at the TCA this year. Tony, what do you make of that?
I'm not quite sure what to make of that. Because it was just surprising to me, especially say something like like Maisel. I mean, maybe critics are just used to Maisel at this point. Um, the Ozark snub kind of shocks me because this season was, I think for a lot of people, I think this season was kind of like a revelation. I know it was for me, as somebody who was never that fond of Ozark in the first two seasons. I just thought it was astonishing this season.
Yeah.
What I think this does is shows that the momentum, at least in comedy series, is, I think with both comedy and drama, I think you have to look at Succession and Schitt's Creek really as the front runners. For Schitt's Creek to get program, comedy, and Catherine O'Hara's nomination is pretty damn cool, and can only help them.
Right. I think Ozark's omission didn't surprise me as much as Maisel's did, because The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel has been nominated here, whereas Ozark has never been nominated here. Yes, its third season was definitely its most acclaimed one, because it was its most astonishing season. I expected to maybe see a Laura Linney nomination at the very least, since she was so talked about this season.
Or Tom Pelphrey.
Or Tom Pelphrey. Right. I expected to at least see one of those maybe get in, but maybe it was just the more critically acclaimed shows that were able to get in to these categories. Even though if you think about it, if you look at the drama field where you see something like Euphoria getting in over it, then it does become very interesting. I don't think it'll have much of an influence on its Emmy chances. I think the Emmys have been much more welcoming of Ozark than any other group has so far, maybe except for SAG. So I still think it'll perform well. I still think it can win drama series. Laura Linney can still be the frontrunner in drama actress. Maisel's snub, on the other hand, as I mentioned, was very surprising, especially because last year, all 6 comedy series, for example, that were nominated at the Emmys as well.
Wasn't it 7?
So
I thought they had a tie.
Was it 7? That's a good, but they all got in. I'm not saying this is going to hurt.
They went 7 for 7 last year.
They went 7 for 7. So that says a lot about what that category could mean. And what surprised me are the shows that edged it out, like What We Do in the Shadows, for example, or Better Things. The third season of Maisel was its least acclaimed season, but it was still well reviewed. But again, I think Maisel is going to blow up at the Emmys again this year.
I gotta say, I'm not really on the same page with you guys about those ones. I'm pretty unfazed by those Maisel and Ozark shoutouts. I thought kind of the ceiling for both of them was a single nomination.
Yeah.
I think we see the critics overlap with the writers a lot of the Academy and the Writers Guild in terms of taste. Ozark has never been big with the writers. Marvelous Mrs. Maisel was dropped after its first season at the Emmys. I think The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is kind of just like Modern Family now. It's just gotten too big, and the critics, they don't feel like they need to support it. So I think it can keep winning.
I don't think it's like Modern Family because, what we're starting to see, I think a trend that's definitely coming along with the Emmys is passion. That it's not just enough to be like universally respected. There has to be a passion element too. Fleabag last year was a passion vote. Schitt's Creek this year is the passion vote. And it's the only time that they're going to be able to reward Schitt's Creek. I think I think what really kind of surprised me, delightfully so, was the inclusion, obviously, and nobody's going to be surprised that I say this, is the inclusion of Better Things. Pamela Adlon has been nominated for individual achievement, multiple times, but for the show to get in at this point really gives it a boost, to the point where I think I've had Pamela Anderson in my Emmy predictions for quite some time. But I think the series could actually finally get in. Maybe not in the comedy series, but I think it could at least get a writing or a directing nomination. And if that happens, then I think it could easily get into comedy series.
Yeah, that one I had in 7th for comedy series, so I moved it up to 6th. What do you guys think about The Great getting in here so many times? Because that's one that I haven't really been considering for Emmy nominations. And I guess I'm still not really, but maybe I should be.
Yeah, Elle Fanning's inclusion was that surprised me. That was one of the more surprising nominations that we saw yesterday, because she edged out quite a few people as well, including, for example, Linda Cardellini, who, Christina Applegate got nominated, the series got nominated, so you would think Linda Cardellini might have a chance as well, but instead they went for someone like Elle Fanning. I don't know what to do with The Great at the Emmys. I have no idea. It could get into series, lead actress, and supporting actor for Nicholas Hoult. It could get none of them. It could just get into series because we have 8 nominees. It could just get into actress. It's very difficult to see, but it's interesting that it is on people's radar, because I didn't necessarily think it was.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the first season of a show doesn't always break through. Sometimes it takes a season. Maybe The Great is going to get a bunch of below the line nominations, and then especially with the absence of I think that we all agree the front runner actress is Catherine O'Hara. I think then with that kind of space, then maybe you could see like an Elle Fanning come in.
Yeah, and along those lines, we also saw Rami nominated here in the comedy individual category. He wasn't nominated last year, but the show is still missing from comedy series. So Luca, what's going on there?
That's interesting, because that's my exact prediction for the Emmys, is that he gets into comedy actor and maybe the show gets into writing, but the show isn't. At the Emmys, I would say the show isn't big enough to get into the comedy series lineup. I wouldn't be able to apply that same logic here, because something like Better Things can get nominated. So it's just another interesting, I guess, nominate or snub in this case, one that I wouldn't even be able to say why it happened, considering this is something the critics have definitely gone for. So maybe it should have been able to get in. But Rami Youssef's inclusion is still great, and I think I was not so confident in his Emmy chances, but I'm starting to feel like he can get in, because the momentum for Rami wasn't necessarily always there, but in the last week, I have been sensing more buzz for that show, and I wonder if that means anything.
Well, he's kind of been riding a wave since the Golden Globes, so I think that I think he just charmed the entire town with that Golden Globe speech, which I think helps. I think another kind of delightful surprise, something I did not expect, was Pose getting into drama series. I'm thrilled about that, because I think the second season of Pose was unbelievable, so vastly an improvement over season 1. So I think that maybe that's a show we're underestimating. If there's room in there, I think maybe Pose could easily get in.
So you had mentioned that Pose was very critically acclaimed, and I think that's actually a very important aspect here. I actually expected it to return, because the critics were there for the second season. I believe its reviews were even better for the second season. It got in at Critics' Choice as well, into drama series and a few acting categories. There isn't necessarily a huge overlap between the Critics' Choice voting body and TCA, but I still feel like the critics have been there for that show, especially in its second season. Billy Porter did miss this time around, even though he was nominated last year, so that's interesting. I think with the 8 slots at the Emmys, Pose can definitely try to get into that lineup. I don't necessarily think, I think it's definitely within the realm of possibility. It's just very difficult to predict. And speaking of Porter, it's interesting that both Emmy champs, Jodie Comer and Billy Porter, who were nominated last year, were now snubbed this year. I'm not sure that means anything at all, but I thought it's an interesting observation.
Yeah, I was also expecting this nomination for Pose, but it is interesting because we kind of think of it more as a niche show, but the TCA changed their voting a few years ago where they used to only get 2 votes per category, so it was all about passion, and now they get 4 votes. So we are seeing them make more populist choices. And if this is a populist choice, then that bodes very well for its Emmy chances where they have 8 slots.
Absolutely.
I also think one of the interesting things, particularly in this drama category, because the drama category, combines limited series and TV movies and regular drama series, and we really only have, Rhea Seehorn and Jeremy Strong as the only kind of drama series representatives, and Jeremy Strong is literally the only lead actor from any drama series in this, and no Brian Cox, who I think some people are still predicting at the Emmys. So it could be interesting, but it also kind of, I think, speaks to how strong Jeremy Strong was in the second season of Succession. I mean, he got so much buzz, particularly for that finale episode. So, I think one of the things with TCA is that we have to look at, does this, even though there's only this short amount of time, does this push the conversation into a specific way, particularly maybe for certain Emmy voters who maybe haven't seen anything. Maybe they'll just look at some of these nominations and go, oh, okay, maybe. And when you have so many slots, it doesn't take that much to get somebody just a few votes that could push them into a category.
All right, well, you can go to goldderby.com to make your own Emmy predictions, maybe the TCA nominations, and this slugfest will influence your predictions, maybe not. We'll see if we get any backlash from the TCA this year. Sometimes the critics don't like it when we critique them. Thanks for watching.